Today, I want to talk about the following. You know what Salesforce costs, but do you know what poor adoption costs? Most organizations know exactly what they spend on Salesforce. They know the license cost. They know the implementation costs. They know what they spend on consultants, support contracts, enhancements, and integrations. If the organization has been running Salesforce for several years, there's often a long history of investment that can be tracked through project budgets, business cases, and procurement records. What is far less common, however, is for organizations to understand the costs of poor adoption. Not poor adoption in the simplistic sense of users not logging in. Most businesses have already moved beyond that conversation. The more interesting question is whether the organization truly understands the hidden operational costs that emerge when Salesforce is not being used effectively. Because poor adoption rarely announces itself. It doesn't usually arrive in the form of a major system failure or a dramatic project collapse. Instead, it appears gradually through small inefficiencies that become embedded in daily working practices. A spreadsheet, a manual process, a manager spending a little extra time validating information, a team creating its own workaround because the official process feels just difficult or inconvenient. Individually, these things seem insufficient and insignificant. Collectively, they can cost organizations an extraordinary amount of money. Recently, I found myself reflecting on a series of questions that I believe reveal far more about the health of a Salesforce environment than many traditional adoption metrics ever could. What makes these questions so powerful is that none of them are really about the technology. They're questions about trust, confidence, behavior, and operational effectiveness. More importantly, they're questions that can expose where value is quietly leaking out of an organization. One of those questions is the following. How much managerial time is spent chasing updates, missing information, or user activity? Now, at first glance, it sounds like a straightforward operational question. But in reality, it may be one of the most expensive questions a business can ask itself. Managers are some of the most expensive resources within any organization. Their role should be focused on coaching, decision-making, planning, supporting team, and driving business outcomes. Yet, in many organizations, a surprising amount of managerial time is consumed by activities that Salesforce was originally intended to help eliminate. Managers chase opportunity updates because information is just incomplete. They follow up with team members because activities are not being logged. They look at status reports because they do not trust the dashboards available to them. They spend valuable time gathering information rather than acting upon it. And their problem is not simply the lost hours. The problem is the opportunity costs. Every hour spent changing information is an hour not spent improving performance. And over the course of a year, across multiple managers, teams, and departments, the financial impact becomes far more significant than most organizations realize. What makes this particularly interesting is that many businesses never calculate this. The cost is hidden inside salaries, meetings, and routine activities. It never appears as a line on a Salesforce project, yet it may be one of the largest costs associated with poor adoption. Closely linked to it is another question that often generates uncomfortable conversations. How dependent are users on spreadsheets or external tools outside Salesforce? Now, to be clear, spreadsheets are not the enemy. Every organization uses them. Every organization probably should use them for certain tasks. The issue is not whether spreadsheets exist. The issue is why do they exist? When users create spreadsheets because they generally add value, that's not a concern. However, when spreadsheets are being used to compensate for missing trust, missing confidence, or missing capability within Salesforce, they become symptoms of a far deeper problem. Over the years, I've encountered countless examples of organizations where critical information exists in multiple places. Sales forecasts maintained outside Salesforce, pipeline trackers that have duplicated information already available in the system, service teams maintaining shadow processes because they do not trust the official ones. Each spreadsheet may only add a few minutes of additional work, yet every duplicate process creates more opportunities for inconsistency, confusion, and wasted effort. More importantly, it creates multiple versions of the truth. And once that happens, organizations begin spending increasing amount of time reconciling information rather than using it. And then brings us to another question that sits at the heart of many Salesforce challenges. How much confidence do teams have in the accuracy of Salesforce reporting and data? Trust is one of the most undervalued assets within any sales environment. When trust is high, people will move quickly. Decisions are made with confidence, reports are accepted, dashboards will be used. Teams align around a shared understanding of reality. But when trust is low, everything will slow down. Reports will be questioned, numbers will be challenged, additional validation is required. Meetings become discussions about whether information is correct, rather than discussions about what action should be taken. And these consequences extend far beyond reporting. Once confidence in data begins to decline, confidence in processes often follows. Users become less motivated to maintain information because they no longer believe it's being used effectively. Managers will seek alternative sources of information. Teams will create their workarounds. Eventually, the organization finds itself trapped in a cycle where poor trust creates poor behavior, and poor behavior further erodes the trust. Technology only rarely solves this problem. Trust is usually rebuilt through a combination of process clarity, leadership reinforcement, and user confidence. And this is where effective training often plays a much larger role than many organizations expect. Good training does not simply teach people which buttons to click. It helps users understand why information matters, how it supports decision making, and what impact their actions have on the wider organization. Another question I find fascinating is how self-sufficient are users when completing Salesforce tasks? Most organizations have a handful of people who seem to know everything, and they become the unofficial experts. The people everybody turns to for help. The people who know the shortcuts, understand the processes, and can solve problems quickly. At first, this might appear positive. The challenge emerges when too many users become dependent on those individuals. Every interruption carries a cost. Every support request consumes time. Every dependency creates a bottleneck. As organizations grow, these small interruptions accumulate into a substantial operational burden. The strongest sales environments are not the ones with the smartest administrators or the most knowledgeable super users. They are the environments where ordinary users can confidently perform the tasks required for their roles without constantly relying on others. This is another area where training can have a profound impact. Effective enablement focuses on building confidence and capability across the entire user base. The goal is not to create a small group of experts. The goal is to create an organization that is collectively capable. Now, finally, there's one question I believe may be the most uncomfortable of all. To what extent do users avoid Salesforce where possible? The wording is intentionally direct because the behavior itself deserves attention. People rarely avoid systems for no reason. Avoidance is usually the result of accumulated frustration. Processes feel cumbersome, data feels unreliable, previous experiences have been negative, alternative methods appear faster and easier. What makes avoidance particularly dangerous is that it often develops quietly. Users continue logging in. Activity might be taking place. On the surface, adoption appears healthy. Yet beneath that surface, important work is happening somewhere else. Information is being stored somewhere else. Conversations are taking place outside established processes. Decisions are being made without complete visibility. Salesforce remains pleasant, but its influence gradually diminishes. That's one of the reasons why logging statistics and activity metrics can be misleading. They tell us that the users are present. They don't necessarily tell us that the users are engaged, confident, or effective. When organizations discover widespread avoidance behavior, the instinct is often to look for technical solutions. Sometimes those are necessary. However, many avoidance issues are rooted in something far more human. People don't always avoid Salesforce because they dislike Salesforce. Often they avoid Salesforce because they don't fully understand, do not trust it, or do not feel confident using it. Which brings us to an important conclusion. When organizations think about training, they often view it as a project activity, something delivered during implementation before attention shifts somewhere else. In reality, many of the costs discussed today are not technology costs at all. They're capability costs. Managers chasing updates, spreadsheet dependency, low confidence in reporting, user dependency, system avoidance. Those are often symptoms of an organization that have invested heavily in technology while underinvesting in helping people use that technology effectively. That does not mean training is the answer to every problem. It isn't. But it does mean that before investing in more functionality, more automation, or more complexity, organizations should first understand whether the people using Salesforce are equipped to succeed. Because the most expensive Salesforce problem is rarely the license fee. It's rarely the implementation cost. It's rarely the consultant invoice. More often, the biggest cost is the hidden friction that exists between people and the platform they're expected to use every single day. And until organizations learn how to identify, measure, and address that friction, they will continue to know exactly what Salesforce costs while remaining completely unaware of what poor adoption is costing them.